I think we are a punishment-based system, and I think that if we don't provide other alternatives to people, that's where we go. And I think even we go back to corporal punishment with our children and how we still accept that in our society, and we haven't moved to change that. I think that if we're going to be looking at other systems, that we have to, and I think Howard Zared said this morning, are we going to move as we've done with public mental health and just putting people in the community and not providing them with supports? From a victim's perspective, I think what they're asking for is not for punishment, but for, if it's a particular issue, an assault issue, a sexual assault or violence against women relationships, is that what they want is protection for themselves and for their children. If we can provide those protections, I don't think anybody sees jail as the answer and locking them up, but they need to have other kinds of supports out there, and they need to have their needs met as well. And that does not mean that the offender needs shouldn't be met, and it doesn't mean that the community needs shouldn't be met, but people have to look at those individual needs and provide people supports where they are at the time, where they are at, and then I think we can move to then bringing those pieces together in a collaborative, healing way.
I guess the issue, and that is going to become the challenge, that a lot of innovative ideas and solutions, even at an informal level, is so based on what support network is in place. And I recognize that in many instances, those supports just are either inadequate or unavailable, in spite of what we would really like to do. And I suppose therein lies the challenge. What happens if you you go through, whether it's some kind of a circle process, a restorative process, or whether it's just an informal intervention in something, and you say, this would be an excellent way of doing this, but when you look for the support or from the community or another agency and it isn't there, what's the alternative? Like, do nothing? Send the person to jail? Which is worse? I don't know what that answer is. But that's reality. And as much as I like the idea of restorative justice, those things that we come up with when we try to be as innovative as possible, I'm not sure how we're going to reconcile that in the real world that we have to exist in.
I don't see a black and white division between restorative justice principles and the court. I don't see every prisoner in jail as suffering. I see tremendous work being done there. What I do see is a terrible transition for people who are leaving their imposed reclusion and trying to return and enter to the community and not being accepted. Some of these prisoners are going back to families, but they haven't a clue what it's like to have kids in the house. They haven't been around them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And yet any agency that has children wants nothing to do with anybody who has a prison sentence. I see people being labeled and put in boxes, and I believe that restorative principles can be applied not only in volunteer community agencies that deal with first-time offenders, but it can be applied with some of the more severe and difficult people that society has to contend with. It depends on whether they're interested in healing the harm or continuing to apply the punishment, because the thirst and lust for punishment never ends.
My name is Susan Underwood, and I coordinate a program which is, to the best of my knowledge, unique. And I wanted to take everybody back a little bit to some of the content that was in George Isbister's presentation to the conference, whatever day that was. Could it just have been yesterday or the day before? He talked about Ron Wiebe. And Ron Wiebe was the warden at Ferndale Institution, and Ron took a huge, some people would call it a risk and others would call it a leap of faith. And he allowed the development of a program which is still 10 years later in place. And it's very, very small, and we hang on to it very tightly because we would never be able to start something like this again in the present political climate. But we take pre-release offenders out of Ferndale Institution on a regular basis on escorted passes, and we take them into classrooms in alternate schools in both the Abbotsford and the Mission School District. And the men work on an ongoing basis with students, at-risk students. And, you know, I'm sure that there's a flood of questions that you might have about that program. But there were a couple of things I wanted to say about it, because I could talk for days about the program. One of the things that we never anticipated in a program like this was the benefit to the families of prisoners. When a man goes to jail, he may leave behind children, he may leave behind a partner who's left to raise those children alone. And let me tell you about one man who was in our program for 2 years. He worked 5 days a week in the school. And when he went to jail, his children were, I don't know, 4 and 6. And after he'd been in jail for 7 or 8 years, his own children were the same age as the children that he was working with every day in the school. And all of a sudden, that man could be a fruitful, contributing partner to his wife. He knew as much or more than she did about the environment in which their children were living. And the fact that their father played floor hockey or basketball with students was something that those kids could be proud of about their father. So what are the long-run consequences of a program like that? They're immense, and we never thought about those kinds of upsides, benefits. One of the other things that I wanted to say, and I think Ron Wiebe would have said this, is that I hear people talking about looking at what our communities need, and I think that we should always look at the strengths of our communities in addition to the needs of our communities. In the Fraser Valley, we have a lot of prisons, and I think that those prisons are full of people who have spent the time in activities, the kind of activities that were spoken about earlier. There's some pretty highly developed reflective practices amongst those people. And they're a tremendous resource, and I think really we lose when we try to keep those people away from our children and from our communities.